Back when I was a young and proud 12-year-old, I was on an early morning paper route in my quaint neighborhood. My dedicated efforts had paid off, and one of the first items I purchased with my hard-earned money was a shiny new 10-speed bike, silver with bold red trim. It was my pride and joy, and I meticulously cared for it, even using it for my paper deliveries. One of my customers, a fellow who was frequently in a rush to get to work when I made my deliveries, lived on my route. I distinctly remember parking my bike to the side whenever I approached his house. But one fateful morning, luck took a cruel turn. As he hastily backed out of his driveway, he miscalculated and ran right over my prized possession, causing severe damage to the front sprocket and derailleur. He poked his head out of the window and casually inquired, "Is it okay?" My heart sank, and I replied with a hint of frustration, "Not exactly." His response was as thoughtless as his reckless driving, "Well, that's what you get for leaving it behind my car," and off he drove, leaving me feeling utterly powerless and disheartened. My initial helplessness and anger gradually transformed into a simmering resentment. I decided not to continue delivering papers to his doorstep. When he complained, I explained the situation to my supervisor, who realized he was merely a serial complainer. My job remained secure, and it felt like a small victory. But this minor act of rebellion was only the beginning. My customer lived along the primary route that all the neighborhood kids traversed on their way to the local 7-Eleven and various other hangout spots. His mailbox, perched on a flimsy steel fence post, was a tantalizing target. That summer, I made it a habit to pull the mailbox from its precarious foundation and toss it over the fence into the nearby cemetery. The act was a mix of fun and mischief, but it failed to fully satiate my thirst for revenge. This neighbor had 3 prominent frond shrubs in his front yard that would grow to towering heights during the summer, only to wither away in the subsequent months. They were scattered several feet apart, and their solitary disposition gave me an idea. One August evening, on my way home from the 7-Eleven, I decided to toss a lit match into one of the shrubs. As expected, the shrub became a burnt husk by the morning. Over the next few weeks, I repeated this fiery act with the remaining 2. I was starting to feel somewhat satisfied by my clandestine acts of vengeance. But then, one morning, as I was delivering newspapers on my route, a newfound inspiration struck. I noticed that a side window of my neighbor's garage was left ajar. My inner turmoil toyed with the idea of pushing things too far, but I was a young and impulsive kid, and the thought of tit for tat seemed fitting. In those days, road flares were standard fixtures in every car. So, I climbed through the garage window and scoured for 2 flares. I lit them up and strategically placed one behind each of my neighbor's rear tires. With my mission complete, I hightailed it out of there and scurried back home, where I promptly returned to bed. I was fully aware that what I had just done might be considered excessive, but my desire for revenge had clouded my judgment. I had undoubtedly ruined my neighbor's tires, yet I didn't care. I couldn't bear to witness the aftermath, nor did I feel any remorse. In fact, I vowed never to commit any further transgressions against him. My story was a wild tale of a young boy's quest for retribution, sparked by a thoughtless neighbor's carelessness and arrogance, ultimately leading to a final act of revenge that I knew was excessive but couldn't resist.
In 2019, I found myself immersed in the daily grind at a call center. For 2 years, I had diligently answered phone calls, trained new employees, worked overtime, and even acted as an informal support resource for my coworkers. I prided myself on consistently scoring above 90 on the evaluations of my calls, a testament to my competence and dedication. Enter Amy, a colleague who had only been with the company for about a year. Almost from day one, she took a disliking to me. I had always had a slightly alternative style, though my attire remained professional. The situation took an unexpected turn when I began taking a new medication to manage my bipolar disorder. Unfortunately, the medication had a side effect: it made me more blunt and forthright than usual. The catalyst for our conflict was a customer who vehemently argued with me, insisting on receiving a promotion that was not currently available. Frustrated, I calmly informed the customer that I was indeed correct. In response, the customer's irritation escalated into a full-blown tirade. Not willing to tolerate abuse, I decided to disconnect the call. At the time, it felt like the reasonable thing to do. Little did I know, my actions would have far-reaching consequences. The next day, I was called into the supervisor's office. To my shock, they informed me that I was terminated for hanging up on the customer without providing a warning. I tried to explain that my bipolar medication had influenced my actions, but the supervisor requested documentation as proof of my condition. I couldn't argue with that logic. Thus began a frustrating 3-month odyssey of navigating a labyrinth of phone calls, forms, and attempts to acquire the necessary paperwork. Throughout this ordeal, Amy became my bane. She seized every opportunity to belittle me and undermine my self-esteem. In meetings, she condescended to me and dismissed my achievements, attributing my continued employment solely to my medication. 2 of my managers even voiced their support, acknowledging my competence, but Amy stubbornly stood her ground, insisting that my crucial paperwork had mysteriously disappeared. As our work transitioned to remote arrangements, I decided to move. Amy caught wind of my plans and asserted her authority, insisting that I needed her approval before proceeding. She promised to grant it. However, she soon pushed me to the brink. One day, she scheduled me for 3 consecutive 12-hour shifts, despite my prior objections, claiming that serious consequences awaited if I didn't comply. In that moment, Amy broke me. I logged in for my extended shift and diligently worked until lunchtime. During my break, I penned an email addressed to everyone within the company, a message I had never anticipated writing. In the email, I expressed my gratitude for my amazing managers and coworkers, acknowledging the satisfaction I had derived from my job. However, I could no longer endure the toll Amy's behavior was taking on me. I named her in the email and candidly detailed the challenges I had faced. Then, I made a life-changing decision. I logged off and went to sleep. The following day, I received a call from the head of HR, imploring me to reconsider my departure. To my amazement, I learned that Amy had abruptly left her position for a different opportunity. My refusal to return to the company was met with an offer of a raise, which I graciously declined. And thus, my path took a different direction, one free from Amy's tyranny. I never looked back.
In a world where communication can be both a blessing and a curse, my relationship with my dad often teeters on the edge of insanity. You see, my dad's approach to phone calls is something straight out of a parallel universe. He has an uncanny ability to abruptly disconnect calls once he's gotten what he wants, without uttering the simplest courtesy phrases like goodbye or I'm hanging up now. It's as if the concept of proper phone etiquette eludes him entirely. Now, let me take you back to a few weeks ago, when a seemingly straightforward situation transpired, highlighting the utter absurdity of my dad's phone habits. I have a peculiar responsibility, managing the utilities at my dad's place. This involves paying his electric and phone bills. One fine day, it was time to settle the electricity bill. However, I found myself entangled in a web of bank-related issues, and the payment simply refused to go through. An unsettling realization dawned on me: it was the last day for payment. I took a deep breath and dialed my dad's number, mentally bracing myself for the impending ordeal. After all, communicating with my father was nothing short of an adventure. Little did I know just how much of an understatement that would be. My initial call served a simple purpose: to inform him of the banking hiccup and to request, ever so politely, if he could make the payment this time around. I emphasize politeness because, trust me, it was a polite request. Or at least, it was supposed to be. The first call ended with my dad hanging up abruptly, right in the middle of my sentence. Frustration began to bubble within me, but I wasn't about to give up just yet. After all, this was my dad, and patience was a prerequisite when dealing with him. Dialing his number again, I embarked on the second round. I started speaking, only to be met with the same result: another unceremonious click, and the call was over. You know the feeling you get when a bubble of rage starts welling up inside you? I was right there. I couldn't believe it. 5 more attempts later, I was on the brink of losing my mind. My dad simply couldn't stay on the line long enough for me to complete a sentence, and I was seething. By this point, I had managed to convey one point through his call-dodging tactics: it was the last day for paying the electricity bill. Unfortunately, my father seemed to have assumed that I was calling to confirm that I had already paid it. To say that I was at my wit's end would be a gross understatement. At that moment, my patience vanished into thin air. I decided not to call back. If he didn't have the patience to listen to what I had to say, then he could bear the consequences of his actions. Fast forward 2 weeks, and chaos had descended upon my dad's life. You see, the electricity connection to his house had been severed. In a fit of rage, he dialed my number, shouting about unpaid bills and imminent darkness. In stark contrast to his outburst, I responded with an almost unnerving calmness. I recounted the events of that fateful call from weeks ago, emphasizing how I had tried to alert him about the situation. But, given his penchant for hastily ending calls, I had assumed that he had it all under control. The festival season in our country was fast approaching, and my schedule was overflowing with commitments. I knew that, realistically, I wouldn't be able to sort out his issues for at least another 2 weeks. So, I casually informed my father that he would have to navigate this bureaucratic maze himself. After all, taking multiple trips to the government-run electricity board office would certainly make for an interesting adventure. As my phone call ended, I couldn't help but savor a hint of satisfaction. Sometimes, life has a way of teaching even the most disconnected lessons.
Around 6 years ago, I was deep into my role as a DPD delivery driver. The job was relentless, with grueling 12-hour days, but I took pride in ensuring that every package reached its destination on time. Returning to the depot with minimal undelivered parcels always felt like a small victory. One day, around 10 a.m., as I was sorting through the heaps of packages, a somewhat irate gentleman parked his fancy car near me and approached, demanding the immediate delivery of his parcels. He mentioned that he had spoken with my boss, asserting that his packages were supposed to be dispatched early in the morning. My boss hadn't conveyed this message to me, which was unusual since he typically gave me the freedom to carry out my duties efficiently. My shift usually began at 5 a.m., starting with package collection, scanning, sorting, and loading, followed by deliveries starting around 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. So, with a cargo full of packages in my long Mercedes Sprinter, this gentleman's parcels were located right in the middle. I had to begin unloading my vehicle onto the street, trying to accommodate this demanding customer's request. After dedicating 15 to 20 minutes sifting through packages to appease him, he abruptly closed his car and drove off without a word. No thank you, no acknowledgement of the effort, just a complete lack of appreciation. However, I learned my lesson. As I became more familiar with the route I was assigned, I decided to reorganize my delivery order. The area where the elderly gentleman resided became my final stop for the day. This wasn't an issue, as the rest of my deliveries flowed more smoothly with many businesses that closed earlier or had scheduled breaks. Over the next few weeks, after this incident, I continued with my modified route. Yet, the elderly man found me again and insisted on receiving his packages. I informed him that he would have to wait until I reached his neighborhood, as his parcels were buried beneath the entire inventory, and I needed to follow my planned route. Frustrated, he drove off and waited for my arrival. Fast forward to 6 p.m. that evening. I was diligently delivering packages, but his was the final stop. I reached his house quite late, just as I had planned. The elderly man met me again, furious, as he revealed that he worked with musical instruments and had a client waiting for hours. This client had been watching me on the tracking app, passing by his residence, yet failing to make the delivery. Unfortunately, the client had given up and left, incurring a loss of €1,500 due to the delay caused by my adjusted delivery route. In this job, I don't need a tip. A simple smile and a thank you would be enough to ensure your packages get the utmost care, delivered promptly.